Hey guys, welcome back. In this segment we're going to learn about the AutoCAD layer naming convention, how to manipulate layers and what the naming looks like. This is important because we have lots of different sheets and certain layers show up on different sheets, and so it's important to know which layer names and prefixes are going to show up on which sheet and which aren't. We make layers to account for most of the situations, but not all the situations. So you're always going to need to add more layers, and you're going to need to know how to name them. And then you're going to need to pick colors when you make new layers too. And the colors are represented by different shades of gray, different thicknesses of lines, and all of that is worked into a system to make our plans very intuitive and readable. So it's important to understand how that works. Once you understand the concepts and the pattern behind it, it all makes sense. But if you don't understand the patterns, it can be kind of daunting and a little bit confusing. So let's sit back, take a few minutes to learn how the system works, and listen to Casey as he shows us the AutoCAD layer naming system. Let's learn.
Today we're going to be going over our Civil Logistics layer naming convention and how you can manipulate layers in order to show certain entities on certain sheets and not show other entities on other sheets. So here on our layer sheet here, which has not been updated in quite some time because we haven't had any need to update it because it works great. We have all of our layers that are going to come in if you run the civlay command. So if you run the civlay survey command, which is going to be civlay and then V, it's going to import all of these layers under this tab here. Civlay preliminary, full, standard, and all will import all the layers underneath them respectively. So now to go over the layer naming convention, which is probably one of the most important things that needs to be learned when you start working with Civil Logistics, is we'll go ahead and start by talking about the first two letters in all of our layers. So the first letter here, V, means that layer is only existing entities. So the first letter here is always going to be either a V or a C. So if it's a C, then that means it's a new proposed entity, and if it's a V, that means it's an existing entity. So for example, if you have the layer VA site concrete, that is going to be existing curb and gutter, it'll be existing sidewalks, anything that's made out of concrete that's already existing on the site. So if you're ever doing a survey conversion, anything that shows up on the surveyor's concrete layer, because it's coming from a survey, it's obviously existing on site, it's going to go on VA site concrete. Okay, if we're doing our own brand new proposed curb and gutter for a site that has not underwent development yet, that would go on CA site concrete. So if I scroll down to Civlay preliminary, CA site concrete is what we're going to put our curb and gutter on. It's what we're going to put anything that we propose. This concrete is going to go on CA site concrete. Okay, so that's the difference between the V and the C, which is all of our layers are going to be either a V or a C to start with. For the second letter, there's a handful of different letters that you might see in that position. You might see an A, G, S, U, D, or a Z. So what those mean is that they're essentially the first letter of what we're referring to. So for VA layers, A means all. So that means that the entities on these layers are going to show up on all sheets. Okay, so this second letter refers to the sheets that those entities are going to show up on. So for VG, that is existing entities inside of your file that are going to show up on your grading plan and your grading plan only. For VA, that's existing entities in your CAD file that are going to show up on all sheets. It's going to show up on every single sheet that you plot. For VS, that's going to show up on site plan sheets only. For VU or CU, it's going to show up on utility plan sheets only. For VD or CD, there is no CD layers because D is for demo, so we're not going to demo anything that we're proposing to be built because why build it in the first place. So for our VD layers, that's existing things that are going to be demolished that are going to show up on our demo plans. The Z is our no plot layer. So anything put on a layer where the second letter here is a Z is not going to plot on any sheet. So this is things that are used for construction, used for drafting when you're in CAD. It could be Civil 3D entities like surfaces or alignments. All that stuff's going to go on a layer where the second letter here is Z. So once you kind of understand the first two letters, the first letter being either existing or proposed, V for existing, C for proposed, and then the second letter being the sheets that it shows up on, you can essentially create any layer that you want using those first two letters and using this naming convention. So the next set of 4 layers isn't particularly important except for the ones that are labeled AND2, AND3, and AND4. So sometimes we run into situations where we'll have multiple different site plans. So you'll have a site plan 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for example, if we have something that's located on CG AND2, that layer is only going to show up on grading plans, and it's only going to show up on the second grading plan because it has that 2 in the second bracket there. But as a general rule, you can essentially create any layer with the prefix VZ dash or any combination of CA, VA, CG, VG, CZ, VZ, etc. And then it's going to show up on the correct sheet that you want it to show up on. So say for example, I have a layer that I want, or excuse me, an entity that I want to show up on my grading plan, but we don't already have a layer existing for it. I can just make a layer CG dash, and then I can name it whatever I want after that, and it's going to show up on my grading plans. So you can manipulate layers using our naming convention to show anything you want on any sheet that you want. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate back to my CAD here to kind of demonstrate this. If I run our command C sheet, okay, and then I go to my site plan, every single layer that you see on the screen here is going to either be on VA, CA, VS, or CS layer, right? So the A's show up on all sheets, so that's going to show up on every single, every time I run C sheet, that's going to show up. So that's things like your property line, CA. Our existing property line is on the outside here, you know, so if I click this guy, then existing property line, VA, that's going to show up. If I navigate to grading, right, still going to show up because it's got that A in the second position, right? But so back to the site plan, all the rest of these layers, as you'll see here, CS, CA, CS, this guy, CS, the road name, CA, everything's going to be an A or an S. So if there's anything showing up on the site plan here that I don't want to show up on the site plan, I can simply select it and move it to a layer that's not on an A or an S in that second letter, and move it to somewhere, you know, that it needs to be moved. It doesn't, if it doesn't need to be showing up at all, I can move it to a Z layer, etc. So you guys kind of understand the first two letters now. So whenever you run C sheet, that layer naming convention is, you know, how our C sheet command works. So it's really important that you use that layer naming convention as much as possible, right? So if you start making layers or naming layers not using our layer convention, you might have them show up and plot on certain sheets that you don't want it to show up or plot on. Everything is run through that layer naming convention. The majority of our commands are C sheet command, our CSVP command, which is going to make your life a lot easier whenever you're finalizing your sheets for plot or for print. So say for example I am creating here I have 2-foot contours here on my grading plan layer. So for example, if we did not have a 1-foot contour layer, which we do, but I'm just going to delete it and pretend that we don't for the time being, I can effectively say, hey, we're going to have a 1-foot contour, you know, run right here, and I want to make my 1-foot contour layer. So as you can see here, we have our 2-foot and our 10. I can just go ahead and create a new layer. I can name it CG, and it doesn't have to be capital letters. All of ours are just in capitals because it's a little bit easier to read. But if you do it lowercase, that's not going to break anything. And then I can just follow the naming convention that we already have existing for now, which is fine, at least for the contours. But essentially everything after those first 3 characters doesn't really matter. So I can name this guy Topo Minor 1 and follow the way that we have our other contours named, or I can just name it, you know, 1-foot contour, and it'd be fine, right? I can go ahead and change that guy to a different color, right? I'm going to move my layers panel back over to the side here, and then I can put this 1-foot contour that I just drew in on the layer that I just created, CG 1-foot contour, right? Now I'm going to go to CSS. As you can see, it's not going to show up because I created the layer with the G. Then I'll go back to the grading plan, and as you can see, it's there where I want it, right? So you can use our naming format to manipulate layers and to have anything and everything show up exactly where you want it. Once you understand the naming convention, it becomes very, very simple. And then all the characters after those first three are just there so that you know what should go on that layer, right? So site concrete, okay, it's stuff that's going to show up on the site plan, and it's going to be stuff that's concrete, etc. So you might run into surveys with really tricky layer names, and you can't quite figure out, what that object is on the survey. But we want to avoid that issue when working in-house, so this is why we have our naming convention set up the way that it is, and this is why we have so many layers by default, and many projects have even more layers because the project engineer working on that has created a bunch more for various different entities.